Hello students, the theme of our lecture is the concept of cultural identity.
The plan of the lecture consists of the concept of cultural identity, cultural relativity, cultural conflicts, the culture of a country in a context of cross-cultural communication. The concept of cultural identity. The cultural context consists of extending context between representatives of different countries and cultures, are expressed in gradual deleting of cultural originality as well. Especially it concerns the culture of young people who wear identical jeans, listen to the same music, and worship the same stars of cinema, sport, and etc. Older generations try to save existing features and differences of their own culture. That is the problem of cultural identity, for example, belonging of a man to this or that culture. Person needs usual order of life, which he can receive only in cooperation with other people. For this purpose, he should voluntarily accept elements of consciousness, tastes, habits, norms, values, and other means of communication prevailing in a given society. Adapting to all these features of life of the social group gives the person the ordered and predicted character, and he becomes an integral part of any concrete culture unconsciously. The main point of cultural identity is the conscious perception by a person of the respective cultural norms and patterns of behavior, available understandings, as well as a national language and a conception of his own personality from the positions accepted in a given society, identifying him with cultural samples of this very society. The cultural identity has a determinative impact on a process of cross-cultural communication. It assumes a set of certain steady qualities due to which those or other cultural phenomena or people can provoke the feeling of sympathy or antipathy. According to this, we choose the appropriate type, manner, and form of contacting with them. Cultural relativity. The rules of culture we belong to are also relative and do not have universal importance. To understand the behavior of a representative of another culture, it is necessary to know how much his behavior is traditional for his own culture. The comprehension of any phenomenon importance of another culture frequently results from the standards and norms of one's own culture. In ordinary consciousness, native cultural values are considered to be better and more clear. Such an approach seems to be natural and normal if not to consider the fact that the same phenomena in various cultures acquire different importance. Thus, it means that our culture does not submit to any absolute criteria. The culture of every nation is relative, that is why it can be adequately estimated within its own frameworks only. This methodological approach in cultural anthropology has received the name like cultural relativity. The basic ideas of cultural relativity were formulated by the American sociologist William Sumner, who supposed that the culture of any people can be clear only within the framework of its own values and its own context. Developing this idea, a well-known American cultural anthropologist, Benedict, gave a detailed interpretation of cultural relativity, having assumed that any culture should be understood not only from its preconditions but also be considered as an integrity. She thought that customs, rules, traditions cannot be understood or appreciated adequately beyond a framework of the culture. The main idea of cultural relativity lays on a recognition of cultural values, equality, created and being created by different nations. Due to the cultural relativity, there are no elitist or inferior cultures. All cultures are unique in their own way, and it would be wrong to compare them with each other. In other words, the cultures of all nations are equally valuable, but it's possible to judge their importance within the framework of the given culture only. Thus, cultural relativity means recognition of independence and full value of every culture, denial of the absolute importance of the American or European estimating system, basic refusal from ethnocentrism and Eurocentrism when comparing cultures of different peoples. The principle of cultural relativity plays an important role in a cross-cultural communication, as it requires respect and tolerance towards norms, values, and types of other cultures' behavior. Accordingly, it assumes practical attitude to the culture of every nation, forming the aspiration to understand this or that culture from within to realize the meaning of its functioning on a basis of ideas about ideal, desirable, and widespread norms on it. Cultural conflicts. The origin of conflicts can be explained by various reasons. In particular, there is an opinion that qualities like enmity and prejudice between people are everlasting and have rooted in the nature of human being. For example, in its instinctive hostility to distinctions. Researchers deny this hypothesis, proving that both hostility towards foreigners and prejudice against any concrete nation are not universal. Conflicts originate from the reasons of social characters. This conclusion in full measure concerns the conflicts carrying intercultural character. The range of reasons of intercultural conflicts origin, as well as conflicts in general, is extremely wide. On a basis of a conflict, there can lay not only insufficient knowledge of the language and misunderstanding of a partner caused by it, but also deeper reasons indistinctly realized by the participants themselves. A rising conflict cannot be considered only as a destructive part of the communication process. They have positive aspects as well. According to the theory of a positive conflict, the conflicts are understood as an inevitable part of the daily life, and they should not necessarily carry a dysfunctional character. Conflict is understood as a type of antagonism or discrepancy of interests. Any conflict has a dynamic character and appears at the very end of a number of events proceeding from the existing circumstances. Condition of things leads to the origin of a problem and then to a conflict. The appearance of a conflict does not all mean the discontinuance of relations between speakers. It more likely implies that there is an opportunity of a withdrawal from the existing model of communication. And the further development of relations is possible both in positive as well as in negative directions. Tension and conflict in the process of communication with the representatives of other cultures can often result from the mistakes of ascription. Awareness or ignorance of cultural features, including religious and ideological aspects, play a big role in the construction of ascription. Knowing such information allows clearing out a lot of things considered to be desirable or prohibited in a concrete culture. Kukonkov believes that the transition from a disputed situation into a conflict itself goes through the contradictory inquest of communication commenters. That is, the conflict acts here as a realized contradiction. This implies an important conclusion that conflict carriers are social actors themselves. Only in that case, if you yourself define a situation as a disputed one, it is possible to consider a situation to be a conflict. According to the opinion of Delhis, there are three basic reasons of the communication conflicts, which are personal features of speakers, social or interpersonal, and organizational relations. To personal reasons of conflicts belongs broadly expressed willfulness, frustrated individual needs, liability or readiness to adaptation, suppressed rage and intractability, pronounced ambition, carrierism, authority or strong mistrust. These reasons of conflict are caused by personal quality of a concrete man. To social reasons of conflict appearance belong such qualities like strongly expressed rivalry, insufficient recognition of abilities, insufficient support or readiness for compromises, controversial purposes and means for their realization. Organizational reasons of conflicts relate to the overload by job, inexact instructions, obscure competence or responsibility, conflicting purposes, constant change of rules and instructions for separate participants of communication, deep change restructuring basic positions and roles. First of all, conflicts can appear among people who are interrelated with each other. The closer relations, the more probable occurrence of the conflicts, and the frequency of contacts with another man raise an opportunity of a disputed situations. It is true for both formal as well as informal relations. The reasons of communicative conflicts is intercultural communication, can be caused not only by cultural distinctions. Behind this, there are often matters of authority or status, social stratification, conflict of generation, etc. In real life, there are no clean intercultural conflicts. Real relations assume the presence of a great number of interpenetrative conflicts, and it would be a mistake to consider that there is the ignorance of cultural features of a partner and the basis of any conflict between the representatives of various cultures. The culture of a country in the context of cross-cultural communication. Great Britain. Culture, their conservatism is deep-rooted, but still British people consider themselves to be honest, judicious, careful, and polite people. Their originality often borders with eccentricity, but during the history there were really original people among them, distinguished by great ingenuity. As scientists, they often can succeed in science and technology. Represented as a nation of the dilettante who somehow copes with crisis, they show the internal force of spirit in extreme disasters. Business. As a rule, British people are interested in long-term mutual relations rather than in short-term experience. Reputation, skills, a firm, and its capital are powerful arguments, trumps, in negotiation for the representatives of the British companies. What they do not want to reveal is the force of the backstage connections. School ties or the network of old friends is a real force in the business life of Britain. In some countries, bargains are quite often stricken on the phone. British people are capable to discuss conditions of an agreement on the phone for a long time, but they almost always ask to present later the agreement in written form. They keep like files and archives. Finally, it is a turn of the British isolation. As a rule, they believe that foreigners always want to outweigh them. Negotiation. British feel comfortable when communicating with each other, English-speaking nations, and they have few difficulties with them in establishing simple but effective mutual reaction. They also feel comfortable when communicating with Scandinavians, Dutch, and Japanese when getting acquainted with them. They consider that they represent a golden mean between excessive formality inherent to the French and German and premature familiarity peculiar to the Americans and Australians. Humor plays an important role in business negotiations in Great Britain. British people can severely play a trick on the representatives of some ruined nations and on expensive people as well. Humor is considered as one of the most effective means in the arsenal of the British manager, and some businessmen can win trust of the British people, demonstrating that they master this feature as well. The British businessmen try to show during negotiations that they are guided by prudence, compromise, and common sense. However, it is possible to notice that British people, even in the absence of any disagreements, seldom come to the final decision at a first meeting. They do not like to hurry. The Americans like to accept the decisions whenever it is possible to rely on their instinct. The British people, tied by traditions more, prefer an instinct to logic as well. However, they show more care. When negotiating with them, it is necessary to offer, could we accept the final decision at our next meeting? British people seldom express their disagreement with the offers of the opposite party openly. They always try to agree whenever it is possible, but they weaken their consent. It is a very interesting idea. Using calm, uncertainty, and restraint in statements, humor, and obvious prudence, British people can laugh in negotiations, but remain rather rigid for a long time. They always take a defensive position, which they hide as long as it's possible. You should try to find out these attributes, showing prudence, humor, restraint, and persistence as well. At long last, you'll be able to see that in most cases it is similar to your own devotion. The area of negotiations with British people can be rather wide. Thank you for attention.